Sarah Bedford from the Washington Examiner. Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
There are so many questions that I want to ask you. Your reporting on the Oversight Committee has just been phenomenal. So I'm going to try to get to them all before the end of the show. I think the big news, of course, I've been focused on Israel and Hamas and everything going on there. But I understand that there is some evidence of Joe Biden's brother stroking him a check for at least $40,000 and some other news coming out of the Oversight Committee. Can you give us a debrief on what the latest is?
That's right. I mean, these are pretty significant developments in the impeachment inquiry that's going on in the House over the past few weeks. The House Oversight Committee has been sifting through thousands of pages of bank records that they got from subpoenaing banks for the personal financial records of Joe Biden and other members of the Biden family. And, that's an ongoing process, but throughout it, they've found two large payments from James Biden, Joe Biden's brother, to Joe Biden, who was then out of office in between his vice presidency and his presidency. And both of those payments coincided with private companies, one of them a Chinese company, sending an influx of cash to the Biden family. So while Joe Biden has tried to argue that these are loan repayments, that he'd lent his brother money and his brother was simply paying him back, it does show that Joe Biden's financial standing was really tied more closely than he's ever let on to these private family business dealings that he claimed to know nothing about, because he wasn't getting paid back these very large sums of money unless the private business dealings were performing well.
That's pretty wild. I mean, when you look at what Joe Biden said on the campaign trail in 2020, what he said in the debates, and since then said that he never talked to his son about his business dealings, and then that language has sort of been softened and moderated. But this appears to be, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, Sarah. This appears to be somewhat of a smoking gun. If you have evidence of checks of money going directly into Joe Biden's bank account.
Right. I think a more honest media would have to confront that fact. I mean, Hunter Biden gets a $400,000 infusion from this Chinese company that CEFC, their emails, their witness testimony that suggests that Joe Biden was a part of this venture. And then a few weeks later, Joe Biden ends up with a $40,000 check that happens to be a 10% cut of the Chinese money that Hunter Biden was given just a few weeks earlier. And that's the sort of arrangement that had been discussed and sort of documented prior to that payment. So, to say that there's no evidence that Joe Biden was profiting off of these lucrative foreign business dealings is a really dishonest position to hold at this point, because we have documentary evidence that Joe Biden received a 10% cut of the Chinese business venture that, witnesses have said he was a part of.
So there was also some news, Sarah, coming out. Maybe you could enlighten me and our audience on this, that there may be as many as 24 subpoenas from the Oversight Committee to the Biden family. What's the latest there?
Well, there's a really complicated network of accounts, shell companies, entities that were used to sort of move this money around. It's part of why this story is taking so long to be told. We're talking about business dealings that stretched over many years, longer than a decade, and, dozens of accounts, dozens of business partners. And I mean, this was, a skeptic, a cynic could look at this and could think that maybe it was a deliberate arrangement to conceal these payments from the type of scrutiny that the Bidens are receiving now. So the Oversight Committee has done a good job, but it's been a long, slow process to unravel some of this. And now they have a clearer view of the full picture, and they know sort of some of the banks, companies, and associates that they need to go to for these answers.
One of the things, just to switch topics here before the end of the show, because I really want to get your thoughts on this. I think it's so timely and relevant for what we've been talking about today. You recently wrote about how the USAID IG, the Inspector General, was warning that Biden's $100 million in aid to Gaza will end up going to Hamas. I, of course, given my background, know this, but can you explain how important this IG's warning is and what this means?
Right. It was a memo that the IG released on Friday night saying, look, in light of the fact that the White House is deciding to send this $100 million aid package to Gaza for humanitarian purposes, we need to just reiterate this warning, one that they issued back in September, that this is a really difficult space for humanitarian aid to go to and for NGOs to operate in, because the sort of system in Gaza is so heavily controlled by Hamas that there's really no way for the US government to ensure that the humanitarian aid won't end up either directly in Hamas's hands or indirectly benefiting Hamas and terror linked groups. And so, for an arm of the Biden administration to be saying this part out loud
Hmm.
is, I think, really significant, because Republicans have really been the only ones sounding the alarm on that.
Sarah, where do we catch you on social media? What are your handles?
You can follow me on X at Sarah C. Bedford.
Awesome. Well, if you're not following her, I'm going to go and make sure that I'm following Sarah, because this is really important reporting that we're getting from Sarah Bedford, the Washington Examiner. I'm